time to shuffle up. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan, let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Commander's Pod. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm joined by Sloan.
Hello.
And we are joined once again by special guest Andrew.
Hello, everyone.
And yes, that Andrew, the kill Andrew first. We appreciate you joining us again.
It's my pleasure.
So once again, Jeff is Disneying it up. So we got the upgrade and got Andrew here.
Yeah, we're making do, as it were.
Yep. So let's move right into Tales from the Table. So you guys had an interaction in a game that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, so if you listen to the last episode, you know Andrew's a really good player and he's a judge, and so he's well versed in the world of Magic. But even those as good as Andrew fall to pettiness sometimes. And so essentially we were playing a game and he had cast a tutor and I had an op agent in my hand, and I was just sitting there waiting for somebody to cast something, a tutor that was worthwhile for me to go get. And so I decided that's a great one to do it in. And so he cast his tutor, I op agented, and he looks at me and he's like, "It is my goal now to end you this game." And so the remainder of the game, regardless of Duncan and our friend Lizard somewhat getting out of control, Andrew had no priority but to exact revenge on me for op agenting him. And so,
well, this is indeed true. There's far more to the story than that.
This
was actually the second op agent in response to my tutor.
Correct. And
I made the mistake of jumping priority, as we've talked about before.
Don't yield your right away, folks.
Exactly so. Yeah, I cast that tutor. The very next response was the opposition agent from another player at the table, and I had that reaction ready. I'm like, ha, free counterspell. And then Sloan had a second opposition agent, and was I cooked.
Yep, and he just looked and he said, "Yep, nope, I got nothing except my sheer pettiness of wanting to murder you now." And so for the rest of the game, he made it very, very difficult for me. Whenever I tried to do anything, he made sure I paid for it. And so even though I know it was in jest and it was in all good fun and stuff like that, it was a really funny interaction that we got to have. And I figured it's a good one to bring up with Andrew being here, so he can try to defend his pettiness. But we all know he needed to.
No, that was sheer spite. You had defeated me at that point.
Yeah,
I was not ready for two opposition agents.
Right.
I'm just happy it wasn't me for once, because usually I am the one that he seeks revenge on.
Yeah. So you're welcome.
The bane of my existence.
Yeah.
As he says, "Kill Andrew first," I say, "I'm sorry, Duncan, you have to die. You are too big an impediment."
Yeah, for sure. So, but that was a fun interaction that me and Andrew got to have a couple of months back. So I figured I'd bring it up with him here so we could talk about it. But just so you know, even as veteran players as Andrew and as skilled and as rule knowledge based as he is, they sometimes forget priority and get ahead of themselves and allow themselves to get stuck in a bad situation. So it happens to everybody, guys. Don't feel like...
Although, honestly, I don't think it would have turned out any differently. if I don't think he was going to cast his op agent in response to the op agent.
Right.
Otherwise, you know.
So
I mean, that was a trap that I fell into. And while I probably should have let Sloan potentially pass priority, what are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah, but so that seeking revenge thing you do, that seems to be kind of a thing.
Well, you know,
but I've seen you give up on a game just so you can get revenge.
Well, and I would even say, furthermore, this kind of leaks into our counterspell subject for today.
Well, that's where I was going, but
right. Yeah, sometimes your goose is just cooked. Whatever the other player at the table has done is so devastating to your game plan that the chances of you coming back from that before someone else puts the nail in the coffin is so minute a chance that you really have two options. Well, I suppose you could sit there like a good little boy and draw go, or you could try to mess with the person who destroyed you.
Right.
Or you could scoop. But I mean, this is Commander we're talking about, and games run long. So that's no fun to just stare balefully at someone.
So you don't feel like it was a bad habit. You feel like every time it's like the times you do it, you've already lost the game and you're just...
It's a bad habit, but
Okay.
it's not the worst habit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about that, because I wanted to talk about bad habits we have.
Yeah.
We all have them, and I'm not like I want to talk about Sloan's. I want to talk about mine.
Right.
I want you to talk about yours.
Right.
We could point out Sloan's all day, but I want to.
I mean, we got a laundry list of bad habits that we can point out. If we're talking about just Magic, it might be a little shorter, but still.
not that much shorter. But yeah. So I mean, I know for myself, using my answer too early.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's something, and it's like I'll think about it. I'll be like, and I'll use it, and then something worse happens the next turn. And I'm like, man, I should not knee-jerk reaction to that. That's a bad one I have. It's tough to you don't know how bad things are gonna get. That seems pretty bad in the moment, but you also you know, for me, I have to look at, is it going to affect my game? Mm-hmm. Is it going to win them the game? If it's not going to hurt me too bad and it's not going to put them too far ahead, sometimes I need to let that go in case somebody plays something worse.
Yeah, I share some of those same vulnerabilities. My mindset a lot of the time at the table is to keep my opponents from reaching their end game board states. And I tend to take a little too much of the responsibility for policing the rest of the table,
Right.
which tends to deplete my own personal answers.
Right. And I do that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, yeah, that's something that I feel like specifically blue players kind of fall into. If I were to pick like a bad habit for a color, I feel like it's blue players over police. So they kind of get in the habit of, ooh, look at all these counters. Counter, counter, counter. And then it's like when it times comes for them to win, everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to counter your thing. They're like, wait, you've had counter this whole time? Like, but it's like, it's one of those things where I feel like you almost get overexcited about always having answers.
You're like, I've got counters, I'm going to use them.
Right, yeah.
So that's another side of it, is sometimes I'll have a bunch and I'll just start throwing them out there at just about anything.
Counter, 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 counter.
And kind of exerting my authority on
Turn
the table.
8 Soul Ring and not on my watch.
Yes, right.
Exactly.
So that'll happen too when I start doing that.
Yeah, I mean, so one that I'll bring up, because I know Jeff will be screaming at us if we don't mention it, is I used to have a really bad habit of starting with like 1 land hands. I was like, I'd look at my other cards and I'd be like, all I gotta do is draw 2 lands. Like, how hard can that be? And it would just be like, nope, not happening for 18 cards. Like, yeah.
Now he only has the habit of keeping a bad 2-land hand.
That's right. Yeah, only a bad 2-land hand. But I will say that significantly less often do I start with a 1-land hand. I try to be more strategic, because there is a point now, since I've been playing a while, where it's not so much that it's just me being affected by me not having any mana. It's also the other players, because it's like it feels bad for them. And like you mentioned in the previous episode you were with us, Andrew, you know, this game is about having fun ultimately. And,
Right.
and other players not being able to target you because they feel like they're bullying you because you have 1 land on turn 6 is a feels bad for them as much as it is a feels bad for you for not having a land, you know. So that idea of starting with 1 land hands, it was a really bad habit I had, where I'd always be like, there's a chance I could have it, or like I would have 1 thing that costs 1 in my hand, and so I just decided to keep it.
Well, I don't know. Andrew
know?
just looked at me, I think, and was like, I don't know. I wouldn't feel bad at all about picking on you for that. But you know,
Right.
Some people would feel bad.
Some people with consciences that aren't the arch enemy and turn everything into CDH would feel bad.
Listen. if I'm going to get a card off you and you got no blockers because you left a 1-land hand, I don't know. You kind of did that to yourself. Now
Right.
give me that card so I can win.
Right, exactly.
And I
I
think
got
that's a more respectful way to play, really. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm not going easy on you.
Yeah,
You
I'm
gotta
not
earn
showing
this.
you pity, because the other flip of it is then, like, if you do end up winning that game for some reason because everyone left you alone, everyone's like,
Boy, we
This
made
is
a
so-
mistake.
yeah, like, this is so stupid. We just left you alone and then you came back and beat us. What the heck?
I mean, I really only have one situation where I would consider playing a 1-land hand if it's not CEDH. And that's, a land, Soul Ring, an Arcane Signet, and 4 other cards I can play with that 4 mana.
Right,
know.
which most decks, hopefully, you can play cards with 4 mana.
Yeah.
If you have decks where you have 4 mana out and you can't play anything, you might need to reevaluate your curve.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean that's the thing. So a lot of my gameplay now is I do try to have, what I do is I think of a turn 1, turn 3 play. Do I have a way? Do I have a play on turn 1? Do I have a play on turn 2? Do I have a turn on play 3? Turn to play on turn 3. And so that's kind of the ideology I try to think about. So sometimes with a 2-land hand, I can do that. You know, I have the Soul Ring on turn 1 into an Arcane Signet. So by turn 2, I have the mana I need and I can do other stuff than turn 3. So there are obviously exceptions to that rules, but that was a bad habit I used to have really, really bad. Occasionally, just for kicks and gigs, if I look at my hand, I'm like, I got 1 land, I got a Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. I'm like, it's full send.
Well, yeah, no, like I said,
Like,
a
I'm
lot
like,
of times
full send.
that is
I don't
almost
care.
always
Yeah, I don't care
a
what
viable
else.
hand.
I
I
don't
don't
care
think
what-
I would pitch that in most situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only reason why I would consider it is if I had a more than a 2-colored commander, obviously, because I only have 2 colors. I don't have the third one in that instance. But even then, I would still be like, you know what, full send. Who cares? Like, I'm close enough.
no,
I'm 2/3 of the way there.
Most people would play that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, the 1 land hand was a bad habit I used to have. That was really bad. Like, I would do it all the time. Like, I'd always be like,
And
yeah.
I would also say sometimes you just gotta fold. If you go down cards and you still can't get to 2 lands
Yeah.
and you're at 4 cards, just let it go. Just sit that one out. But you also probably, if you ask, they might let you do a spread shuffle and shuffle again and go back and try again. You know,
Yeah.
probably they wouldn't make you start with 4 unless you're playing a very high level game.
Yeah, the less your power level is, the less likely that you're relying on combos for your win con, the more likely people will, as a rule 0, put a floor on the hand that you can have.
Right.
In a lot of games that aren't cutthroat. If you hit, 5 cards and you still haven't drawn a hand that can do anything, a lot of tables will say, okay, show us your hand. Yep, that's bad. Draw a new 5.
Yeah.
Right.
How about you, Andrew? Bad habit?
Oh, I have plenty of bad habits. Yeah, trying to do too much myself is a bad habit. That's one of my bigger ones. Getting a little too excited when things go well and causing everyone to take too much notice of me.
Yeah.
I'm not the sort of person who quietly builds his resources.
Andrew is not subtle.
Yeah.
The only time he's subtle is when he's using his velvety softness of his voice to lull you into a sense that he's not the threat.
Like the song of the siren of old.
It's very quiet. Just relax. Let it happen.
It will all be over soon.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I will say too, another thing, I mean, it kind of sounds like I'm trying to say it's not a bad habit, but I promise you, I feel like it is a bad habit, is reminding people of their triggers. Like that is not my job to help you remember all of your triggers, specifically for veteran players. Like, you should know, if you've been playing as long as you have, and I get it, even veteran players build brand new decks, but for the most part, I would say myself, even when I build a brand new deck, I'm pretty well aware of the cards I'm putting in there and what they do and how they interact for the most part. It's very rare that I'm putting a card in there, I'm like, I have zero idea how this works, but I'm going to put it in here because it's blue. Like,
I think that also goes into you're not militant about it, so it doesn't come across as aggressive or mean.
Right.
You're kind of a rules lawyer.
I am. I really do. One of the things that bugs me the most, and I'm going to pick on Jeff because he's not here, and I don't care.
You pick
after
on him when he
hears this.
does, so that's fair.
That's true. He has a horrible habit of tapping all of his mana at once and then casting his spells. And I've caught him before with a card that's a counter, Render Silent, that says, counter this spell, that player can cast no more spells for the rest of this turn. So then he wants to untap his mana. I'm like, no, sir. You tapped all your mana down.
That's
It
fine
is
for
gone.
a newbie, not for
Yeah, for a veteran player who knows that the cards out there
but
exist.
I'm talking more about how, like, when you play your turtle deck where all our stuff comes in tap, and you reach over and tap my planeswalker, that does not care that it's tapped.
But it says it comes in tapped.
That's glorious.
It must be tapped.
I love it so.
It is not by me, but by the
Equipment-
gods of magic that have declared it comes in
equipment,
tapped.
he will reach over and tap your
I will
equipment
put it
for you.
in tapped.
If I could play the card rules lawyer in EDH, I so would.
Right. And so I do, and specifically with that deck, I do it because I think it's hysterical.
Oh, you get great joy out of it.
It is so, it makes me so giddy on the inside, like just knowing, like, sir, I believe you forgot something about that planeswalker. Even when people are like, they're like, hey, I'm casting this instant spell, I'll tap the instant spell, even though it's not coming into play, just because it's, you put it on the board. I'm making it tap. Like, it's so ridiculous for no reason, which is 100% the reason why I built that deck, just for the fact that I get to make everything, literally everything come into play tap. Like, it's my favorite. But yeah, I do rules lawyer a little bit. I will say I get a little particular, and there are instances where it does frustrate me, which I try not to let out in the game or be aggravated towards the person. But it's hard when the people are veteran players. Like another classic one that's happened before is someone casts a couple of spells and they didn't do the triggers, which mattered in this instance, that they did them correctly and cast the things in the right order. And then they didn't do the triggers, or they cast the spells wrong. So they want to untap everything and recast everything. And it's like, well, you've already done a bunch of things. And it's like, for me, sometimes it's a little aggravating where it's like, okay, we let you do it once, but now this is like the fourth time. It's like the fifth time. It's like, come on, like you got to learn.
Lucas.
Yes. How many Lucases per game?
Yes.
Right. So, it's one of those things where like, and I do get a little rules lawyer. I do care because to me, they're like you had mentioned about the rules of the game. Magic has built this game to be played a certain way, which helps the enjoyment of the game, I do believe, to a certain extent. And so making sure we're all abiding by that rule set helps the enjoyment for the table, because everyone understands we're all playing by the same set of rules. And when one person's doing it their own way and another person does it their own way, it's a little...
So I have one that feeds into Andrew's trigger from last time, which is I tend to, when I have stuff going on with my deck and I'm thinking about other things, I'll be playing things and I'm not really sometimes announcing them. It's tough sometimes, especially when you have a very complicated situation going on and your turn's going to take a minute. And a lot of times I feel rushed, not by anybody else, by myself,
Right.
to not take up everybody's time and to try and get through things quickly. And it really comes to a head when I play the Nadu deck. And I know Andrew tried to help me play test that, and it was very frustrating for him. And I felt awful because I kept flipping a card and then putting it in my hand. He's like, "What was that?"
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I will say too, when you start getting into more of the higher power that we play in, I think as a group, and we tend to delve in, sometimes because we're so used to playing, we forget that like even we need a chance to respond to things, and we need a second to read and figure out what's going on. And so sometimes we get in the habit of, well, if you're taking too long, everyone else is going to get mad at you. If you
Jeff does not have that problem.
Jeff does not. Jeff has the exact opposite problem. Jeff thinks that his turns aren't long enough. I think. I swear that's true.
He thinks our turns are getting in the way of his turns. Is what the problem is.
Right. But there is a level of, I think sometimes we do develop this bad habit of, oh, well, everyone just knows what this does, so I can just kind of keep throwing things out and not allowing us to
For
respond.
me, it's also, I don't care about that card I just flipped, so I don't say anything.
It doesn't
I
mean
forget that somebody else might care about it.
This means nothing.
But when Lear
This
might
is
bring
not
it back
the
out of
land
the
I was
graveyard,
looking for.
I need to know it's there.
Right. So, I mean, I think that's a habit that we've all fallen into, where we're kind of in the middle of doing a combo and we forget technically other people can respond, and we don't give them the second to respond. So I do think that's one. I've fallen to that one a couple of times too, especially if it's a new deck I just built and it's a new combo I'm finally getting to do.
Yeah.
Like I get very excited.
You just start doing it.
Yeah, you just
without-
start doing it and everyone's like, hey, 1 second. I'm going to stop that before you even get to do it the first time.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, you're here. You're playing. I forgot.
Yeah.
This isn't goldfishing?
Oh,
Hey,
man.
where am I?
Yeah.
I thought you guys were just here to witness my greatness.
Just witness the power of me. Right.
Behold my greatness in all its splendor.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I think sometimes the bad habits too that we develop are just because like we play with the same people all the time, you know, and we sometimes just forget, especially if you're playing with new people, like, oh, I should probably slow down and explain this. Maybe this person isn't as well versed in the game or doesn't understand.
Yeah, there's situations like that too.
And just as very veteran enfranchised players, all of us, or many of us, have really extensive knowledge of what the relevant cards are in our format, what they do, what the interactions are, and we forget that other people don't have that depth of knowledge.
right.
As I said, somebody said, "What's a dockside?" We just started playing. Somebody played Dockside Extortionist. We're all counting our artifacts. Somebody else goes to counter it. Somebody goes to clone it. You know, and this other player goes, "I have just one question. What's a dockside?"
Right.
You know, and it's like we forgot that way before this, we should have kind of made sure everybody understood what was going on.
Yep.
Yeah. So I do think that, you know, it's just sometimes it's habit because we get used to playing with the same people. So those habits become bad habits when you sit in another group. But yeah, there's always little things. I think one
Do you have any more, Andrew?
Do I have any more bad habits? Oh, yes, I do. Do I want to bring them up?
Just bring up one more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it goes along with the point we were just making. Tending to let myself get irritated when people are playing slowly. Because EDH is such a long format game.
Right.
And because we frequently have quite a few people at the table at once, between, 4 and 5 is common, sometimes even 6.
Yeah, we've played a 6-man pop before.
When somebody's got a complex set of interactions and a combo going on, and they're taking 20, 30 minutes for their turn to resolve, sometimes you just got to accept that that's part of the format.
Well, and the other part of that is sometimes it's not a complicated thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just searching for a land.
They're staring at their hand, and it's still a forest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they still don't have a counter spell for the spell that's going on.
Yeah.
But they're trying real hard to bluff you.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes, I think we all could have more patience. Sometimes
Yeah.
it may be warranted. Sometimes maybe somebody's ridiculously holding up the game, but you still have to have some grace and still have to say, you know what? I did just take a 20-minute turn, but I was doing something every second, but I did just take a 20-minute turn. So maybe I just need to chill out for a minute.
And the other thing too is sometimes think about it, if you just took a 20-minute turn, that 20 minutes, every second you did something changed what every other person had to do on their turn.
Yeah.
And then it changed again, then it changed again, then it changed, so that's the other thing too. Sometimes we forget, like, when we're playing stuff, it's going to make our next opponent, well, now I have to rethink because of what you just did. I thought I knew what I was going to do. Now I got to figure out what I'm actually going to do.
Unless it's Jeff. And then he's
unless
just
it's
gonna
Jeff
take
in
his
turn
time
one, he's
anyway.
trying to figure out which basic land to put down because apparently that matters. So, but yeah, I mean, everyone has bad habits. Don't feel like you're the only person that has a bad habit, and don't feel like everyone else has a bad habit and you don't. Trust me, you probably got some from reaching and grabbing people's cards without asking, to playing with Cheeto fingers, to all kinds of other things that could potentially, you be doing and not realizing that that's kind of frowned upon.
Right.
Respect other people's cards.
Right.
So,
and we've talked about that one too. That's another one thing that Sloan brought up one time was, or actually Jeff brought it up, is when people like tap on cards or like, roll a very heavy dice right on top of a card.
Solid metal dice.
Yeah.
And the menace that they are.
Yeah.
flipping a coin.
Yep. So, we all have bad habits. It's just kind of, and that's why I wanted to have this. So like we're veteran players and we do like tips for beginners, but I want to point out, even we have bad habits. Even we make those same mistakes sometimes that we're telling you not to make.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. So don't beat yourself up. Just try and be aware of what your bad habits are so that you can try and limit them. We would normally now be going to,
Jeff's trigger.
Jeff's triggers. We will in a second because you did have something.
I got one. It's not magic related.
Well,
but
actually,
it's
why don't we do
somewhat-
it now? Because the other thing, we're going to do another counter spell where we talk about something back and forth.
Yeah.
But it feeds more into our main topic for today. So why don't you go ahead and
All
do
right. So this is
Sloan's
more
triggers.
This is Sloan's triggers. So this is more about work. So me, Duncan, and Jeff work together at the same place, and it also happens at my house. And I don't understand how people, like, you must be a psychopath. People that use all the toilet paper, and then they just walk away, and there's like 6 rolls right behind you to restock it. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, or the one that really gets me is They use all the toilet paper on the roll, so they have to get a new roll. They use the new roll and then just stand it like on top of the toilet, or like they don't put it on the thing. Like,
wow.
Like
I thought with Jeff being gone, we were gonna have two
No,
episodes in a row.
No, the
where
reason
it had to do with magic.
No, I will say this one does have to do with magic, because I will say I have been to the card shop and I've gone to the restroom after someone came out, and this has happened before. I'm like, are you like really that like just doing this?
Yes.
For 10 seconds is too much.
They can't
Just
see your
just
hands,
be
but-
glad that the toilet paper wasn't replaced by draft chaff.
But it's just one of those things to me, and my wife does it too. My wife will go like we have a stack that holds our toilet paper. It holds like 4 rolls of it or whatever in our bathroom. So she'll go when it's out and she'll get a bag of toilet paper, pull one out, place it on the counter, and put the bag on the floor. I'm like, you didn't even restock. I'm like, you were one step away. Just do it.
But why do I feel like you're also the person, if they hang it the wrong way, you're gonna be upset?
I don't get upset. I'm just at least say happy they hung it, but I do fix it. I am that person.
Yeah, okay.
I
See,
fix
there we
it.
go.
I
There we
fix
go.
it every single time. It always goes over the top, never on the bottom. If you're putting your toilet paper underneath the bottom, meaning it's coming out from the bottom side when you pull it, you're a psychopath. There's something wrong with you. I don't understand how you do that. Like, that's crazy to me. But yeah, it's just so irritating to me.
Jeff is gonna be so happy when
He
hears
will
this.
be, but it's just
and it makes
one of
me
the-
sad.
It's just one of those things to me where I feel like it's just common human decency. It's right there. It
You know
takes
what?
10 seconds.
I am going to go to all the bathrooms at work and take the rolls off of the toilet paper
Just stack
holder.
them on the end
Put
of
them
the
on
toilet.
top.
Just put them over by like the sink or
Yep.
something, or just It's just one of those things. To me. It's just I don't know why it just irks me, because I think it's specifically when they use a new roll and put it on the toilet paper roll holder, like they just stand it on it. I'm like, that's just pure, like that's just spite at that point.
Yep.
I feel like, so it's just a ridiculous thing that I just wanted to get off my chest, and Jeff wasn't here to take up the spot. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get this off my chest. It bugs me so
I'm
much.
sorry I gave you the chance.
I know. That's why I didn't tell you what it was
But anyway,
in our prep. So, but a fun what's irritating me, one that's a little lighthearted for you guys.
all right. But so the other counter spell I have is, how do you resolve rules issues during a game? Because we have them pop up, and they could be anything from a minor role issue that 3 out of the 4 players know how to resolve it. But how do you resolve the ones that are tough, that slow down the game?
So that really depends on what your resources are at the time. If you've got a someone with judging experience, or just someone who regularly tournament organizes, a TO, that you can ask for an opinion, that is generally enough for most play groups. If you have a really complicated question that's an absolute burning inquiry because it's going to affect the whole outcome of the game, comp rules are on the Wizards website, and most people have cell phones.
Right. I would say it depends on the gravity of the situation, right? So if we're trying to figure out something and it's not something that is going to, like you said, dictate the entire outcome of the game, a lot of times what we've done is we say, all right, let's rule it this way. But
Whatever the majority is usually.
Yeah, like this is the majority. I'm okay with this. Let's do it this way. We can look it up after, or I can look it up while you guys are taking your turns. I can kind of dig into it a little bit more and see what happens. If it's something that's extremely pivotal and crucial to, like, this is either going to win, like this is something that could potentially win the game in this instance, I will try to say, okay, well, this is going to win the game. Basically, we need to sit down and figure out how this is going to work to make sure it works this way, because this ends the game if it works the way I think it does, or it doesn't work the way I think it does. It messes up. It doesn't do anything. So this isn't crucial. So I would say it's more of a case-by-case basis. If it's pivotal for the game, I would say that you need to, I personally am okay with taking the time to try to look it up, especially if you have 4 people with cell phones. You can usually find an answer pretty quick, especially if you have access to a judge.
With Jeff, you and I, we usually set a time limit. We'll say if we can't find it in 5 minutes, we'll just...
Yeah, if we can't find it in the first couple minutes, we'll just go away.
But there are times when it is a crucial thing to the game, and an improper ruling is going to cause a feel bad somewhere.
Yeah, and so I mean, if it's something minute and it's not going to really change anything, majority rules, I think, it's kind of the safest way to do it, and then just look it up after, and then just address it after, being like, "Yep, we did it right, we're good." Good on us. We guessed correctly, or we
Now, luckily,
knowledge comprehended.
Andrew knows most of the rules. Sometimes he has to read the card to really know what we're talking about. And sometimes it's like really, so not going back to a bad habit. One bad habit I have with you is when you say, can I see the card? And sometimes I just told you what the card was. You know the card is in my head. I don't say that ever. But sometimes, and I forget that like,
the exact wording
sometimes
matters.
one word makes all the
Well,
difference.
I have an anecdote on that. When there was an elf in, I believe, Brothers War that has an ability similar to the Urza ability, except she's red-green. She can tap non-token artifacts for green mana. Didn't read that closely enough. Built a whole deck around it with token artifacts.
Right. And actually played it for like a week before you realized.
And then finally someone read the card in full and went, those are tokens. And I went, oh crap, my whole deck doesn't work.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something where, I mean, again, rules are important to the game of Magic. They exist to help play the game of Magic. In some instances, you know, depending on if a land taps for 1 or 2 mana to be able to cast one extra spell that doesn't really have a great impact on the game, I don't think is worth holding up the entire table for 20 minutes.
Right.
But at the same time, it's something that can be addressed after the game, and you can do majority vote on in that moment. And,
So I would also
you know.
say if you're using group majority, make everybody read the card.
Yes.
Because there's
Yeah.
been a lot of times that people make a snap judgment. And then when the final we get the right answer, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that's how it said it. Let
Right,
everybody
yeah.
read the card.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. How reading the card explains the card, as the professor says.
Well,
Not so much anymore in Magic, but it used to.
One of my problems is that I have a pretty good memory for relevant Magic cards. And so when I'm presented with a rules conundrum, oftentimes I'm like, okay, I know this card does that and this card does that. Okay, so that interaction should go this way.
Right.
But if I don't make certain I'm actually remembering the exact wording of the card, things slip through, and I've been known to make not so good rulings when I'm not careful.
and I've had it before where when you haven't said, well, let me see the card, and you've given a judgment, and then when something comes out, you say, well, you didn't tell me that's what it said. You know, you only asked me this question. You know, if we don't give,
Or
if
you phrased it wrong when you asked the question.
Yeah.
that can happen too. So, you know, there can be sticky situations that can hold up the game. Try and keep them to a minimum. Keep it lighthearted. If it's not going to have a great impact, just kind of move on as best you can. Come to a consensus.
Yeah. I mean, the resources are there, though. I mean, if you're not as fortunate as myself and Duncan to have somebody that used to be a judge and go to a local game shop that has people that TO all the time, you know, if you're not as fortunate as that, maybe you're just playing with your buddies at the house. You know, the internet is there. There's a lot of resources on there for Magic. I mean, a plethora, some might say. So it's one of those things where you can definitely find an answer eventually.
Be careful when you're searching the internet for rules, interactions, questions. Some of them have changed as the rules have evolved. The internet is forever, and web pages tend to end up crystallized.
Right.
So
And that happened a lot with Lion's Eye Diamond when they changed the rule again.
well, not just. There are a lot of interactions.
But I'm saying, like, there was, we went several months with an adjusted way we were playing Lion's Eye Diamond just to find out that actually they had recently changed it and it was back to the original and we didn't need to have switched. And it was this whole thing.
Right.
But,
And that's one of the things I will say that the Magic website does a pretty good job of is they date the ruling.
Right.
So it will say like this is as of, you know, June 2024. And so that's the other way is check the article dates or check the ruling dates that you're looking up. Make sure it's if you're looking at one from 1996, probably not the most recent ruling unless that rule has never changed, which I would be flabbergasted at.
and also try not to use forums as your way to rule unless you find multiple forums listing it or it's specifically a judge forum.
Yeah.
I mean, people give wrong answers on the internet all the time, by the way.
I know, hard to believe,
I
but
know. Who knew?
not here though. Only right answers from
like
these.
you can't
this crew.
necessarily trust what you hear on the internet.
Yeah. So
So, yep. So that's just some tips on how to handle that. We're not going to do it. That doesn't do what you think it does, because this whole episode is going to be kind of talking about judge rulings and how they work and stuff. What we're going to do is pick Andrew's judgy brain and kind of about some kind of rule questions that we think come up or things that we think might be interesting.
This is the one time it's okay to be judgy.
Yep.
I got them last week with the quiz. They did pretty well on it though, and I think it's time for the turnabout.
So, first one is, if multiple permanents owned by different players send a card to exile when it would go to a graveyard, what happens?
Okay. So I'm assuming that you're saying multiple replacement effects
Yes.
are applying to a card which is trying to go from the battlefield to a graveyard and modifying it such that it goes to exile instead.
Yes.
The relevant rules for this is when multiple replacement effects try to modify the same event, that object's controller, or if it doesn't have a controller, its owner, decides which of those replacement effects apply.
So if it was for an example, let's say one guy, your opponent had a Leyline of the Void, and the other guy had a Dothi Voidwalker, which I both believe essentially do the same thing.
Basically a classic example. Yeah, and someone kills your creature.
Right.
That creature is going to go to exile one way or the other, just a matter of whether or not it has a void counter on it. And if that is your creature, then you're going to be the one to decide whether it just goes to exile or goes to exile with the void counter.
And so to shift the cards a little bit, let's say I'm the owner of the Leyline of the Void and the Dothi Voidwalker is my opponent and my creature dies. I can then choose, I'm going to put it via Leyline of the Void, so you do not get a void counter on it.
Leyline
matter
of the
whether
Void
it
is
was your-
opponents only.
No, Leyline of the Void is everything.
Nope.
I can double
Check it
check.
out.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's another 1-drop black enchantment that affects all players, but Leyline of the Void is opponents only.
Yep.
Let's see.
While he's looking that up, what situation would there be no controller? You said if there's no controller. I'm confused about how that can happen. Is that just like a one-off of...
Oh, what was the situation? I don't remember the situation specifically that can cause that to happen. That's something I would have to research.
Okay.
But I just remember that when I was looking at the rule for that a while back, that's one of the things it stipulated. I think there was another fallback if it had no owner, but I can't even fathom how that happens.
Yeah, so Leyline of the Void is opponents, so good on you. You remember that. I was thinking because of...
You passed the quiz. He was quizzing you.
I was. I was thinking of Leyline Anticipation because Leyline Anticipation is only for you.
Right.
So the ley lines they go back and forth. And then I think Leyline of Punishment is no player can gain life and damage can't be prevented. So they literally have a lane line that's only opponents, only you, and then for everybody. So I was getting confused. So I do apologize. But yeah, so it's interesting that you can choose being the owner of the thing that's going to interact for that
because you get used to timestamp where it matters,
right? When
that
something
way or priority,
right,
are the two ways a lot of things are resolved.
Yeah,
and when it's your turn, you own it. A lot of times, priority matters, but in this case, it doesn't.
Right. So I'll ask one of my questions since Duncan got to ask his. What did you think, or how do you think the Neheb ruling change went, in your opinion, and why do you think it was good or bad?
So, in my personal opinion, I think Wizards did about as well as they could have.
Okay.
When I first heard of the Neheb ruling, and for people who are out of the loop, Wizards changed the way they speak about main phases. Previously, they talked about pre-combat main phases and post-combat main phases.
Yeah.
This became a situation, though, when you have extra combat spells, which create extra main phases. If a card referred to pre-combat main phase, then there's only one of those. But you can have potentially multiple post-combat main phases.
Right.
So when they changed it to first main, second main, exchanging first main or pre-combat main for first main and post-combat main for second main, that meant that if you had a third main phase, because you took an extra combat, normally all your post-combat main phase effects would trigger again. Because each main phase after at least one combat were a post-combat main phase.
Correct.
Neheb said that you get red mana, I believe, equal to the damage you've dealt opponents.
Right.
Each post-combat main phase. Or in your post-combat main phase, as the card actually reads. But in practice, it was in each post-combat main phase. When Wizards changed the terminology to first and second main phase, suddenly Neheb only had the potential of getting one instance of that extra mana. Whereas the entire EDH deck that Neheb is based around is getting multiple extra main phases, each with bonus and escalating bonus mana. Now, of course, this made Neheb commander players very unhappy. It effectively invalidated the primary strategy of the deck in one fell swoop.
Right.
And for a little while, it looked like Wizards had just considered this collateral damage. However, very quickly, the uproar reached a certain pitch that Wizards decided they would, through errata, fix Neheb such that he worked the way they were used to him working within the new rules regime. And frankly, I applaud them for that. I think that it's fair for people who play a beloved commander whose whole strategy is based around something that a Wizard's rule accidentally, from all indications, invalidated, for Wizards to do what they can within reason to keep that card the way it traditionally has functioned. And effectively, I believe that's what they did.
Right. I kept saying it wouldn't have been fair to nerf Neheb when Nadu is allowed to run unfettered.
Meanwhile, the bird is poking its head into every room like The Shining.
Yes.
Right. Jeez Louise.
So next question is, what are the intricacies of phasing? Because I know this is one people get wrong a lot. For instance, are they controlled? Do they exist when they're in phased state? Can you count their pips for devotion?
So, yeah, phasing is one of those previously depreciated abilities that Wizards was legendarily afraid of. They basically put it real high on the storm scale, which, for people who aren't familiar with that, this is Mark Rosewater's personal scale for how likely a magic mechanic from the past is to appear in a premier set, so something in standard.
So the lower the number, the higher probability.
Yes, the higher likelihood of that mechanic reoccurring, with the title namer Storm being extremely unlikely to show up in standard again. So phasing was very high on the Storm scale. When this seems to have changed was the printing of Teferi's Protection in one of the commander decks, I believe in 2017, in the vampire deck of that year.
Yeah.
The Edgar Markov deck. But it was very well received, and it didn't cause as much confusion among players as Wizards seems to think it would have. And from that, they've been gently reintroducing it to card designs.
Wasn't that also when they changed Oubliette, or did they do that later?
I think they did it later
I think
that
happened
year.
Just a little bit later than that. Most likely in response to player response to Teferi's Protection.
Yeah, I think that was right because I remember they reprinted Oubliette with the new wording on it, I think after Teferi's Protection, if I remember correctly.
It previously was some strange...
It was just exiled under
it. Was exiled, but it kept tokens. And yeah, it basically functioned like phasing without being phasing. It was a much cleaner implementation with phasing.
Right.
So the way phasing works, and this has bedeviled players all the way back since it was introduced in Mirage Block back in the mid to late 90s, phasing cards phase in and out on the untap step as part of the untapping in the same vicinity there. Cards that are phased in, phase out. Cards that are phased out, phase in, if they have the keyword phasing. Cards that phase out without having the keyword phasing do it whenever their trigger resolves, basically. And that seems to be the new implementation. Like Oubliette you mentioned is when it ETBs, when it enters. the creature that is targeted phases out until oubliette leaves the battlefield. A phased out card just doesn't exist. It's like it never existed. So the best way I have to explain how phased out works is treat that card as if it isn't part of the game. It didn't leave. When it phases in, it doesn't enter. So no enters abilities, no leaves the battlefield triggers. It certainly didn't die because it didn't go to the graveyard or from the battlefield. It just isn't there. And if it isn't there, you don't count it for any effects that care about cards in the game. It doesn't have devotion. It doesn't contribute to your devotion if it's phased out. It isn't a card on the battlefield if it's phased out, even though the card itself might be still just lying there.
Right.
A lot of people either turn their card face down when they're phased out or they flip them upside down. There's not a real good standard way of designating a card as phased out. That was just never dealt with.
Right.
But yeah, as far as who controls it, it's not a controlled card because it isn't part of the game.
Right. You can't count it as part of the
Exactly.
permanence you control.
It's an irrelevant question. A phased out card isn't there. Of course, when a card that's phased out phases in, it's going to phase in, I believe, under whoever controlled it when it phased out.
Yeah, the control does not change.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's not a part of phasing in. It's
So it's essentially, it ceases to exist and then
pretty much anything that
re-exists.
would reference it will not find it.
yes, exactly. It's just like it's not there. It didn't even leave the game. It just suddenly wasn't.
It's like it's sleeping.
More so that it got erased from history.
It's like it went to an ethereal plane and never existed to begin with and then came back. So kind of like anytime anyone has ever written anything about time travel. Pretty much just like that.
So yeah,
It just
Teferi-
magically disappears and then magically reappears somehow.
what Teferi did to Jamura, it just suddenly was there, and then it wasn't. And then it returned, 3,000 years later?
Yeah. And we all forgot that it was there for 3,000 years and then it came back.
The
So-
Phyrexians certainly forgot.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So I guess another one I have here, I'll do my second one is, when you were a judge or as you judge even now, how do you handle learning about these new abilities as they're coming out? Specifically, we talked about recently how it seems like every single set is coming out with new keywords and abilities and how they interact with the game. So how is someone, when you were either a judge or as you continue to kind of assist?
So my experience with judging is a little different than someone who became a judge now. I mean, I'm honestly not even certain if the judge program still exists.
Right.
Because of all of the tumult of the fallout of COVID. But yes, I was a legacy judge. I got into the program right before Wizards offshooted it to a private company, before Judge Academy became. And COVID hit immediately after I became a judge, so I was not able to do events.
Yeah.
The world was shut down until after it became a subscription service by some other name. But yeah, as far as learning the rules go, I mean, playing Magic helps, reading articles helps. Each new set, Wizards releases a document they call the release notes for that set. This details both the common interactions that the new cards will have, as well as any changes, big or small, that they've made to the overall rule set. And of course, Wizards maintains on their website a PDF, or a text document if you prefer, that is their full comprehensive rule set for Magic. And I believe the Bloomvero version of that is like 292 pages or something like that.
Yeah, just keeps getting longer and longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and be careful when you're referencing specific chapters of the rule set. Like, for example, last week when I was talking about clones, most of that came from the comp rules section 707, but just as recently as a couple of sets ago, that was actually 706. So it got pushed a little deeper into the document.
Yeah, gotcha.
I mean, I remember when Magic came with the rules in the starter kits.
I've got one of those rules inserts from an
Yeah.
Ice Age starter deck.
Yep, that's exactly the set I was thinking about when I got one. But
Yep.
even back when I played Revised, it still had them in them.
Right.
And I'll do a follow up because, like I said, we've had so many new rules. What's a new rule that came out? We'll just say this year, so 2024. What's a new rule that came out that you thoroughly enjoy and you think this is a great addition to the game? And what's one potentially that you're like, they could just get rid of this? It doesn't do anything. Because I know what Duncan's is, and I know what Jeff would say. It's from Bloomburrow. If you remember the one that we're like, this doesn't make any sense. This shouldn't be a keyword. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
A recent one from this year. There's been such a deluge of sets this year that they all just kind of blend together for me.
Yeah, I'll toss out mine, and it's because I'm a fanboy. Free running from Assassin's Creed, I think, was a very cool
Yeah, I like that.
added rule. The reason why I like it because it kind of doubles down on if you're going to go assassins, it gives you benefits, but also if you're going to go a commander damaging deck,
Right.
it gives you benefits. So they kind of double dipped and let you still play it in non-assassin decks, which I thought was good on Magic. They did a good job of making a new card that would entice people to add it to non-assassin decks. And then I think the rule that we hate is, what was it called? Valiant or something like that from Blue Barrow?
Yeah, I think that might have been it. I
That one
couldn't
or the
read-
Pauls?
The pause wasn't even a rule. It's like instead of putting 1, 2, and 3, we're going to put 1 pause, 2 pause, 3 pause.
Right, and then you
On the
choose how
seasons.
many. I think the card was there's an ability that costs 1 paw, there's an ability that costs 2 paws, there's an ability that costs 3 paws, and you can pick up to 5 paws worth of abilities. So you can pick like the 3 and the 2, or you can pick the 1 5 times, or however you want to do it. Like you pick a pause amount worth of abilities to go off when you
But
cast it.
Valiant was just, if that was what it was called.
I
don't
can't remember. I can't
now.
even remember.
But it
'cause-
was basically just, hey, this creature has this following ability.
Yeah, and it didn't actually do anything.
mean-
it just meant this creature has this ability, and the Valiant ability was not consistent. Like it was different.
Right.
And so it was
I mean, in a lot of ways, that's just the key. The not keywording, but like ability words, I think they call them. Things like landfall.
Right.
Landfall doesn't mean anything by itself. It has an expectation, but the actual, when they put landfall there, that's just saying, hey, this does something with land.
right, which, and I guess you could argue that's the same thing that this is doing, because if you took off the word landfall, the ability would still work exactly the same.
Exactly.
Right. So I guess that's a fair.
That's my only point though, is they don't need those words.
right.
It doesn't tell you what the thing does. It only tells you when it's going to do it.
Yes, but they do add to the flavor of what the mechanics is trying to portray. It's the same with the D&D ability words. Like if you will remember a little while back, we had the
Was it threshold?
Adventures in Forgotten Realms
Yeah.
and Battle for Baldur's Gate. And a lot of the cards in those sets had words before the abilities, either activated, continuous, or triggered, that just kind of described what the flavor the card was going for with that ability was. And I think that added something to the card, especially for nerds with crossover interests like myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I love seeing, disintegrate on a beholder, even if it's not technically, exactly what I'm expecting from that ability.
And I will say, I guess the other advantage of having that singular word identify that is that it also allows you to say, for example, I have a disintegrate trigger. I have a landfall trigger.
Right.
I have a valiant trigger. And instead of saying I have a trigger on this creature that does this, it will at least help you kind of identify. But it's hard because when you do it the right way, like I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But when it's these other ones, we're kind of like, that's stupid. Why would they put that? Just put the
they're
ability.
trying to cut down. Well, they aren't anymore. But at one point, they were trying to cut down on the words.
they
How many
definitely
words? You think so?
Oh, yes, they're still doing. I mean, even as late as Bloomburrow cutting enters the battlefield down to just enters.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to shave a couple of words off common clauses.
Yeah.
So they can make room for more of this superfluous flavor-based wording.
Right.
And that's a plus and a minus to
Yeah.
me. There are definitely a lot of times where I think that adds to the game.
Right.
Right.
Did you have any rules particularly that stood out to you this year? I mean, maybe you just didn't. They weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't. This year did not have the crazy rules some other years have had.
They just always feel
Spree
like
was one I liked. I like
that was
Spree.
the other one I thought of that I thought
because
it was
it's cool that you get a spell and you really get to choose what the spell even does.
right.
Yeah, Spree was just modal where you're forced to pick at least one mode.
Right. It has no abilities.
I mean, you can't cast a Spree card for the mana value in the upper right-hand corner.
Oh, you cannot.
You
No,
cannot
have to
you
choose at least.
must
Yeah, it
choose
does
at
say
least
you
one.
must because I think on the cards a lot of them where it says Spree, it says you must choose one mode.
What happens then when a spell says you can cast it without using its mana cost?
Then each of the modes of the Spree card are considered additional costs. So I believe you can cast or pay additional costs for spells cast without paying their mana cost. Therefore, you would just pay for the Spree modes and you would ignore the casting cost in the upper right-hand corner.
Okay.
Just that part of it.
All right. That's one that just popped up because we were talking about this. So that's kind of cool. But,
Right.
So you don't really think you have any, though, that pop out?
Nothing really. Like I've enjoyed the Legend Matters themes, especially from the Assassin's Creed sets that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Also the Doctor Who Beyond set.
Yeah, that was technically last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe it was winter, so it was either real late last year or real early this year.
Yeah.
But
So
Okay. What is one rule you wish everyone would get right more often?
yeah, understanding priority probably when you can respond to things. A lot of people don't really understand how the priority system works.
Right.
They know you can cast an instant at any time, and they interpret that colloquially and literally. So rather than saying, well, okay, I have to wait till the beginning of an upkeep if I don't cast it by the end of the previous turn, they say, okay, before you untap your permanents, this. Okay, but if you pass priority at the end step, there's no more opportunity to respond until all the beginning of upkeep triggers have been put on the stack.
Yeah.
And then, of course, jumping priority in front of other people, which, you can always back them up if it mattered for your benefit. But, if it's not in your benefit to back them up, sometimes you just let them do their thing and then you take priority afterward. But that's kind of feel bad for the player who doesn't know what he's doing.
Right. And that happens sometimes in the middle of your turn.
Right.
You cast a spell that has 2 targets. Somebody responds to the very first target.
Right.
Well, then I'm going to choose your other thing.
Yeah, no priority happens until all the modes are chosen, all the targets are chosen, and all the costs are paid.
Yeah,
Only then does it go on the stack.
We've talked a lot about priority. That is one that I think is probably most commonly gotten wrong.
I will say that sometimes the thing that is funny about priority, which again, I've never done it, but then hearing someone say it, it's like, yeah, that is technically the way that works, is when someone casts a spell and they pass priority and everyone passes priority and then they say, well, before that spell resolves. No. Right. That spell has resolved. Everyone has passed priority. It's done. Like you cannot now put more things on the stack. It is now resolved. And that's one that again, I've never done it, but thinking about it, it's like, yeah, I can see very easily, like that's happened before. I've heard it happen before.
So calling back to what we had last week with the clones.
Right.
When that clone controller chooses the target, or not the target, the choice for the clone, there is no more opportunity to respond.
Unless they screwed up priority and did it when they cast a spell, which also happens.
Correct. If they didn't pass priority.
Yeah. So, and then the other one that's always funny.
Finale of Devastation also has this problem. Yeah. By the time you've chosen what creature you're tutoring for and putting on the battlefield, it's on the battlefield.
Right.
Yeah.
And so another instance of that is where people say, I'm going to cast this, I'm going to hold priority.
Yes.
And they try to cast a non-instant. That's another one. It's like, no, that's like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can only.
You're just trying to you're just trying to forcibly hold priority. Then you're like, I just refuse to pass.
I just refuse
it's like
to pass.
I always joke that if somebody's about to win, just refuse to pass priority, and then they never win.
The holding priority is one that I laugh about sometimes because even some members of my play group that have been playing for as long as I have, a solid 30 years at least. Almost 30 years, I should say. We're not quite there yet. But doesn't understand that when you're holding priority, nothing is resolving. It's like, okay, so I hold priority. Now this resolves. Okay, so you're passing priority. No, I'm holding priority. No, that's not how that works.
Right, yeah.
But then what's really going on in their head
You
is...
don't have split second just because you said I'm holding priority.
What's really going on in their head is, but I don't want you to mess this
please
up.
don't counter this.
Yeah. So, but also trying to cast sorceries or non-instant spells while they're holding priority is another one that
happened just
too.
last week.
Right. Yeah. Someone's like, I hold priority. I'm casting this sorcery to go tutor or whatever. It's like, no, you can't do that. You gotta instants only, my man. Instant
Sorcery
speed
is
only.
only when the stack is clear and it's your main phase.
That's right. So,
and then did you have any more?
yeah. So I had one more. So, when you were a judge or becoming a judge. When you were taking all that stuff and you were learning intricacies of the game, do you think ultimately now that you went through that and you did all that helped you become a better Magic player? Do you think coming out on the other side of it because you learned more stuff, or do you think sometimes it's almost a burden because you can't play ignorant anymore?
No, I've never been the sort of person who angle shoots feigned ignorance. That's not something I'm about. I will say that it proved to be a little disappointing because of the way the program evolved after I got in.
Yeah.
As I said, it seems to me that it's become more of a subscription service after and during COVID than it was really a program. But as far as it making me a better player, everybody tries to be on top of their game when they're the authority. Imposter syndrome is a real thing.
Yeah.
And you don't want to give someone a bum ruling and ruin their enjoyment of the game. I mean, ultimately speaking, if you love the game enough to be a judge, you probably love the game enough to try to be the best possible ambassador for the hobby you can be.
Right.
And there's a responsibility that comes with the prestige of being a judge or even a rules advisor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do definitely feel like it's made me more careful in my rulings than I previously was. As far as giving me a better understanding of the rules to a degree, but for the most part, it's just wielding this awesome responsibility with the respect it deserves.
I think Uncle Ben said something down those lines.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like this was all just part of his machinations to become the evil overlord of EDH.
So he can be a proper overlord.
Yes.
A prim and proper one, as it were.
Listen to the silky smoothness of my voice.
Yes,
And
exactly.
attack Duncan.
Those are not the cards you are looking for.
Yes.
This is not a threat you're detecting.
So the last question I have for you is, what is one rule you wish Wizards would change?
Yeah, a ruling that I know you guys have talked about that's near and dear to my heart is ever since they printed the commander decks for the Doctor Who Beyond, Universes Beyond, and we started getting more permanent spells being copied on the stack. It would be intuitive to believe that when those spells become tokens, when the spell resolves, that this would be creating the token. However, the rules as basically a footnote say that this does not, quote unquote, create a token and therefore does not interact with effects that replace the creation of tokens. The most common of which would be something like Doubling Season.
Right.
So if I cast a historic permanent with a 6th Doctor on the battlefield, I will make a token copy of whatever that permanent is that is non-legendary on the stack. Then when that resolves, even if I have a Doubling Season in play, I'm only getting one extra copy of that thing.
Right.
which was very vexing to me when I noticed this, because not super obvious to me when it was first printed.
Yeah.
Because I'm throwing all of these token doublers in that deck going, all right, yes, I would like 25 Ugin the Spirit Dragons. That'll all alt right now. Thank you. But no, I had to retool the deck pretty significantly because of that ruling.
Right.
And it's probably a power level thing, but I really...
Oh, I'm for sure thinking it's a power level
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
I feel like if that was a limitation they were concerned about, they probably should have gone about it in a more explicit way, because I don't think it was made quite obvious enough.
Right. No, I think that's definitely something people get wrong a lot because it was not made clear.
Right.
Because people think, oh, it makes a token. So therefore, doubling season's going to work.
Why
Annoyed
wouldn't you think
procession
this creates?
will work. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I got one more I'll sneak in there for you before we move on to the next thing is because we kind of talked about keywords. What's a keyword you would love to see reprinted that you think, man, this would be so fun to get back? To give you an example, we were talking about in the last episode, mutate. We were talking about how you can't really make a mutate deck because there's just not quite enough of them to make it worthwhile, and they're not good enough. One that I have that is kind of near and dear to me is detain.
Right.
I thought detain was such a cool ability where you can, CMC of this level or lower are tapped and they don't get to untap and they can't, detaining stuff I thought was super cool.
It's basically pacify.
Right. And the cool thing was I was going to build a deck about bouncing and flickering creatures that detain.
Right.
So I just keep detaining everybody's stuff. And, Lazov, not the Azorius Renegade, but the other one, not Lazov, what's her name? Lavinia.
Yeah.
She had a version that she was pro red and she detained all permanents CMC 4 and under.
Yeah.
And
that's probably the best one.
Right. And it was like such a cool ability, but there's just not enough detain stuff to make it worthwhile. So that's one.
Right.
Personally, I wish they would maybe reprint is detain. Do you have any keywords that you would love for them to reprint? Like what's the top of your list? If they could bring back for a set and kind of make it the theme of a set, what's a keyword you'd love to have them?
Lots of self-recursion abilities, buyback, retrace. Oh, those would be delightful. Heck, I wouldn't even mind seeing some additional banding. Not that combat is quite as relevant as it ever was, but
That may
I
be a way to
honestly
make
think
it.
they would find it's not quite as complicated to people as it's been.
Arcane is something that I feel like the little bit that they put it in there.
Splice into Arcane.
Yeah, I just even Arcane existing, that's basically all it does is you can splice it with Splice into the Arcane.
Right.
But there's so few cards that care, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would be one that if I wish they would either say those cards don't exist anymore, or at least we're going to do something else with.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I'm sure they could. Arcane it by itself is just a signifier, I believe a subtype of instants and sorceries.
Right.
So you could do something different with arcane spells and have more arcane spells easily enough. Splice into arcane, yeah, they don't like that mechanic for the same reason they don't like the mechanics I just mentioned. It's very difficult for them to design a card which is good enough that people care without being so good that it breaks formats or warps the experience.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, Andrew, thanks for letting us pick your brain and be judgy. I think for sure it's, again, me and Duncan have the privilege and have the honor of having Andrew in our play group. So we kind of get to always do this. But we thought since we had the opportunity with Jeff being out, we could maybe have him answer some rules questions and talk about some of his experiences.
And now that you
world.
know the vast knowledge at his disposal,
Right? Maybe
you understand why he needs to be killed first.
maybe you're beginning to grasp the concept of the kill Andrew first phrasing for sure.
Yeah, you thought that Leyline of the Void was going to do something to your creature dying, but no.
Yeah, that's right. So.
So Sloan, you got any advice for the beginners?
Yeah, so we're just gonna learn a couple of keywords again, and I figured with the judge here, it'd be helpful to kind of go over these. So there's 3 different instances of abilities that kind of get muddled, and the thing that also is annoying is sometimes they overlap with each other. So you can have the 3 I'm talking about are triggered abilities, activated abilities, and static abilities. So all three of them can easily have the other one on them and function, but each one technically has its own definition in which the way it works. So to give you an idea for the definitions, and we'll see how good the rules lawyer is here. He quizzed us last time. What is considered a triggered ability in Magic the Gathering?
A triggered ability is any ability that starts with words like when or as or similar sorts of verbiage that creates a trigger that goes on the stack that isn't a replacement effect.
Right. So triggered abilities have a trigger condition and an effect. They are written as when, whenever, at, triggered condition or event, effect, and then instructions, if any. A triggered ability may include instructions after the effects that limit what the ability may target or state that it can be countered. So the most classic example of this, and because Duncan is here, are you going to pay one for that? That is the most infamous blue player phrase, I think, in existence is, are you going to pay one for that? And the reason why is that ability is a trigger ability that says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if they do not pay one, you may draw a card. Ristic study. So that is what you would call a triggered ability in regards to, and probably the most infamous one, I would think, unless you can think of one that's more infamous, Andrew, than...
I mean, dockside.
Yeah, you could definitely make a case for enters the battlefield, or as we now speak, enters abilities.
Right.
Those are probably just as long a history.
Right. And so, and again, those are triggered because most of those state whenever or when this enters the battlefield.
When this enters, do
when
effect.
this enters, do effect. So that is what your triggered abilities are going to look like. All right. Next one, activated abilities, my sir.
Activated are actually really easy to note.
Yep.
Look for a colon.
There you go.
So activated abilities will have a cost, and then they will have an effect after a colon. The cost may include mana. You may also, in the effect, sometimes with older cards, they'll have additional costs that they'll mention. Those are, even though they're included after the colon, if they say it's an additional ability, it might as well be before the colon.
Right.
Additional cost, you mean?
Yeah, an additional cost.
So activated abilities are those that you pay some cost to make the effect happen.
Right.
A lot of times, in almost every case, unless it's older cards, that is identified with a colon. Pre-colon is cost, post-colon effect. And so a lot of times these are things...
So tapping is a cost in those effects, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Right, that
They
is
don't
part
think about
of the
it when
cost.
Paying 0 mana is a cost, and people don't understand that because it sounds like it's free.
Well, they do after playing a Nadu deck with Shaku.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with this, some of your activated abilities are going to be things like Shronic Resonator. So this one's interesting because this is an activated ability that deals with triggered abilities, which is why I picked it. So Shronic Resonator, you pay to tap it, copy, target, trigger ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this is an activated ability that targets a triggered ability. So you have this activated ability targeting a triggered ability, which again is just, it's a funny little interaction that Magic does, but this is kind of how these intricate things kind of work. But then, of course, other activated abilities, all your mana dorks, for the most part, are activated abilities.
And all activated abilities are assumed to be at instant speed unless they say otherwise.
Correct. So, and that's why
and planeswalkers, by the way, are activated abilities.
Right.
Yes, but they have a special rule saying they're only at sorcery speed.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, activated abilities are always going to be identified by cost, effect. And luckily, one of the things that, we can commend Magic for is they are trying to streamline a lot of stuff, and they're trying to make it a little bit more uniformed. Back in the old days, some of the cards were a little more clunky, and so it was a little bit harder to sift through them, as it were.
Right. And the other thing is, so talking about the planeswalkers, many people don't understand it's a cost because, well, how can +1 be a cost?
Yeah.
Or things that untap, how can that be a cost? That's the opposite of a cost. No, untap can be a cost. Umbral Mantle has untap as a cost.
Right. Yeah. And so So the last one here that we're going to touch on real quick is going to be the continuous abilities of magic, or the static ability as they're known as. So these are things that, Andrew?
Yeah, those are any abilities that simply always function while the object is on the battlefield.
Right.
Unless it says otherwise. Sometimes they function in other zones.
Right. So an example of this is an old world enchantment that says all creatures have haste.
Concordant Crossroads.
Concordant Crossroads. So it's not a triggered, it's not an activated, it's just this is what's happening.
Creatures have haste.
All creatures have haste. And the thing about it is, because this is when world enchantments existed.
Yes. I'd like to see those again too, just for the nostalgia.
Yeah, right. But world enchantments, this was how they distinguished that it affected everything, is it was a world enchantment instead. And so, but the reason...
World enchantments have a rule that not many people know about because it doesn't matter. There can be only one world enchantment.
Oh, well, there you go.
They're effectively legendary for the entire classification of cards with the super type world.
Oh.
And across board states. Yeah.
Yes. But again, you'll almost never see it, even in a game of EDH, because there's so few, and so few of them are relevant.
Right.
But yes, a new world enchantment entering the battlefield removes all the current world enchantments.
So that is a static ability or continuous ability that has a cause and effect based off of other world enchantments entering.
I think that's a state-based effect, actually.
State-based
in the same way that the Planeswalker uniqueness rule is, well, I guess at this point they're just all legendary, so the legendary rule. But yes, it's as if they all were legendary and shared the same name. It's the same basic effect.
Right. So, but the static one I wanted to bring up, which we kind of touch bases on, is Arkelos, Lagoon Mystic. So,
the tapped.
He's a tap turtle. So
you just can't go an episode without talking about that.
Listen, man. Life.
You love what you love.
Is not a race, which is what his flavor text says with the dots, which is why I always do it like that. But he has the ability as long as he is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. As long as he is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. So it's one of those weird things where it's a static ability, even though it uses
with a qualifier.
So it's like this weird kind of, it checks him first, and then it has the result of it. So it's this weird kind of limbo, but it is a board state condition.
Yeah, that's a continuous ability that causes a replacement effect on permanents entering the battlefield.
Correct.
Which is very complicated way to put it.
Right. But the most accurate and correct way.
Yes.
Which is why I wanted to go over these when Andrew was here, our resident judge. So those are three key abilities that basically encompass almost every ability in the game. Those are the overarching words that are used for it. Is this a triggered ability? Is this an activated ability?
Well, the other thing is
this
replacement effects, but we talked about that, and that
and state-based actions.
Yes, and state-based actions.
But those are
both a little more complicated and would require a little more time than we wanted to get.
Right. So, but those are the three main ones that almost without fail, most abilities are going to fall usually underneath one of those categories in some fashion or another, or sometimes they might kind of dip their toes into.
Right.
So,
understanding which type of ability you're dealing with will help you adjudicate what happens. Triggered abilities, of course, can only be triggered when you have priority. Continuous abilities are always in effect from the moment it enters the battlefield, with the first time state-based effects are checked. And triggered abilities are whenever their trigger happens, they'll be going on the stack after whatever effect created them finishes resolving.
And triggered abilities can cause, and correct me if I'm wrong in how I'm wording this, a situation where things that would not normally cause priority. It's more the thing that's getting the triggered ability causes the priority. But for instance, if something said whenever a player taps a land for mana, could cause a land tapped for mana to be respondable to, but it's more that you're responding to that trigger. But it creates a scenario where something that normally does not pass priority can be passed as one.
So basically, this is the interaction with mana barbs. Mana Barbs, of course, being a red enchantment that says whenever a player taps a land for mana, they take damage. This is a triggered ability that is triggered by the land being tapped. Of course, we all know that tapping land is a special action to produce mana.
You don't
and
normally
doesn't
have
normally use the stack.
and you don't normally have to pass priority.
Exactly. You don't pass priority on tapping a land for mana. The mana is just immediately available to you when you tap the land as a special action. The Mana Barbs trigger means that when you tap the land for mana, this is going to put a trigger on the stack, which is then going to create a round of priority.
Right.
Right. So it's almost forcing your opponent to pass priority.
I mean,
on something they normally would never have to on.
Yeah, you could tap multiple lands simultaneously, I believe, and then have all the triggers go on the stack right on top of each other. But there's going to be a priority pass before you can cast a sorcery.
Right, but that's almost like you holding and maintaining priority.
It's similar.
Yeah.
Because of the way casting spells works, you have, in most instances, the option of paying costs after announcing the spell, rather than floating the mana and then paying from your pool, from your mana pool. If you do it that way, then the spell is going to be on the stack before the Mana Barbs triggers go on the stack. Either way, you're taking the damage before your spell resolves, but sometimes it makes sense to not let your opponents interrupt you getting all the mana together.
Right.
Right.
So but that's what we just did is made something that was supposed to be for beginners much more complicated.
Right.
But I just thought it was an interesting interaction.
But I do want to bring up one final instance, and that's just why I kind of touched on this. So, and I this happened in a game I was playing, and I want to make sure I judged it right, which is why I kind of talked about it. So I had a guy who had an activated ability. Mm-hmm. It says sacrifice a creature, scry one, right? Mm-hmm. Vasir, essentially. It was on a different creature, but same ability. Okay. And then he had the creature that he sacrificed says that whenever this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent or target opponent, I think it was.
Okay.
So his question was, I'm sorry, that wasn't it. Whenever this creature dies, draw a card.
Okay.
So I said, he asked me, because he was going to scry first. I was like, I believe you have to draw the card first.
Right.
Because you are paying by sacrificing that creature, which means it's dying as part of the paying before the ability you're paying for and activating activates.
So this is pretty easy to adjudicate.
Right.
When you have an activated ability, in order to announce the ability and put it on the stack, you have to pay its costs.
All right.
In this case, it's sacrificing a creature.
Correct.
However, triggered abilities are not put on the stack until after whatever effect caused them is
fully resolved.
Well, is put on the stack.
Right. Well, yeah.
So in this case, you would sack the creature to announce the scry. The scry effect goes on the stack because it's a activated ability.
Right.
Once that's done, then and only then does the other permanent see that the creature has been sacrificed and put its own trigger on the stack above it, in this case, draw a card. So before anything resolves, and after all the triggers and activated abilities are put on the stack, you have a scry trigger, and then above that, you have the draw trigger. And there's no way to stack that such that it is any different ordering.
Right. So he would have drawn first and then gotten the scry.
And then got the scry.
Okay. So I did judge it correctly because I was playing with some guys that are newer. And so he asked me if that interaction works the way he thinks he does. And I said, I believe you're wrong. It's actually the other way. You have to do the draw first because the creature dying is a triggered ability that happens because of it dying. And because you're using it to pay the cost of the activated ability,
Yeah.
So I did judge it right, which makes me feel better.
That reminds me of a card that I hate, and I can't remember the name of it. But it says,
you hate it that much,
draw
huh?
a card, scry one. And I'm like, I hate that card.
Draw a card, scry one.
Yeah.
Oh, for the effect.
Yes.
Okay.
It's so stupid because I want to scry before I draw. I don't want to scry after I draw.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did you do this just to irk me, Wizards?
They knew it. Yeah.
But anyway. But I think this has been a great episode. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
Really enjoyed having you.
Yeah,
the
we
past couple
appreciate
weeks.
you coming in and filling in Jeff's seat. And we hope everyone else also enjoyed listening to Andrew's vast knowledge. And hopefully you're understanding why we kill Andrew first. And you're understanding why he is always the arch enemy and everything he touches is CEDH. And he's just the worst person to play against, but the best person to ask questions to.
Right. And if you have any questions for him, feel free to email us at cast@commanderspod.com.
Yeah.
And we'll pass them along and we'll put them on the air. We'll have Andrew back for sure at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you again.
In the meantime, fall to my machinations and join my band.
Don't do that. Kill Andrew first. But I want to thank Andrew. I want to thank Jack May at Info Pilgrims, as always. I want to thank our Patreons. And you can become a Patreon yourself by joining us on patreon.com/commanderspod.
Yep.
You can check out our website at commanderspod.com. Don't forget to check out our YouTube videos. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Yep. And as always, and especially now, kill Andrew first.
If you can.
Gather around the table, friends, it's time to shuffle up. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan, let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old.